$5. That is all Cassandra Santos has left in the world. A crumpled $5 bill folded into the pocket of a waitress uniform that has not been washed in 3 days, the fabric stiff with old coffee stains and the sweat of double shifts that paid her nothing because customers do not tip when they see the fear in your eyes. The November rain falls so hard it sounds like the sky is breaking. Her car makes a sound like a wounded animal when the engine finally gives up, a grinding wheeze that turns into silence so sudden and complete that Cassandra can hear her own breathing, ragged and desperate, fogging the inside of a windshield that has not been cleaned since summer. The wipers are frozen mid-swipe. The battery indicator glows red. 3%. Her phone is dying just like everything else in her life is dying, piece by piece, moment by moment. Behind her, on the empty Chicago highway, the red taillights blur and disappear into the downpour. She is alone now. Truly alone. The backpack in the back seat contains all of it. Everything. 3 changes of clothes. A toothbrush that has lost half its bristles. A notebook with phone numbers written in fading ink. And the photograph. The one that survived the fire 3 weeks ago because she had been carrying it in her pocket when the flames took her apartment building, when Preston Mercer's faulty wiring and his refusal to hire an electrician turned her home into ash and her world into a wasteland of grief and paper notices. The photograph shows Emma. Her daughter. Age 6, with hair the color of wet sand and eyes that believed in her mother completely. Emma believed that Cassandra would fix everything, would find a way, would keep her safe. Children believe in impossible things. Emma is at St. Catherine's shelter across town right now, wearing borrowed clothes that do not fit, sleeping on a cot with a plastic mattress, running a fever that started this morning and has climbed all day to 102.3 degrees Fahrenheit, and her mother cannot reach her because the car is dead and the phone is dying and there is $5 in the world and it is not enough for a taxi, it is not enough for anything. The rain pounds the roof like fists. Cassandra reaches for the phone one more time. 1 bar flickers. Then nothing. The screen goes black. Dead. That is when the headlights appear behind her. Not a single set. Multiple. Twin beams cutting through the downpour in perfect alignment, pulling up behind her disabled car with the precision of a military operation, and Cassandra's heart does something violent in her chest because this is how things end on empty highways. This is the moment people disappear into news stories that never make it to the national channels. The doors open. Men emerge from the darkness wearing suits that cost more than everything she has ever owned, pressed and perfect despite the rain, moving in silent coordination like they have done this 1,000 times before. Their shoes make no sound on the wet asphalt. Their faces are carved from something harder than flesh. There are 6 of them, and then the 7th door opens, and the man who steps out is different. He is taller. He moves like a general surveying a battlefield. Nicholas Moreno is 6 foot 2 inches tall and broad-shouldered in the way that speaks of a life lived in the weight and gravity of power. His hair is dark, styled back from a face that has a scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone, a thin pale line like a blade had once tried to cut him in half and failed. He wears a cashmere coat worth more than a year of Cassandra's old rent, the dark charcoal wool hanging perfectly despite the rain soaking into it. His watch is gold. His rings are silver. His eyes are the color of a storm. He walks toward her car with the unhurried pace of someone who has never been denied anything in his life. Cassandra's hands are shaking. She has heard the name. Everyone in Chicago has heard the name. Nicholas Moreno. The whispers come in diners when men in suits sit in the corner booths and speak just loud enough that waitresses cannot help but overhear. Moreno. The one who controls the South Side. The one whose word is law. The one who buried his own son in a cemetery on the North Shore and came back to work the next day without a single crack in his expression. The window. She needs to roll down the window. The button does not work because the car is dead and the electricity is dead and everything is dead. She opens the door instead, stumbling out into the rain, and the shock of the cold is like a blade wrapped in ice. Her clothes are soaked instantly. Her hair plasters itself to her face. She is shaking so badly that her voice comes out fractured, broken, barely a whisper. Please. Please, I do not have any money. My car just broke down. I did not mean to pull over on your road. I will move it. I will push it. Just please do not. The words tumble over each other. Nothing makes sense. Fear has erased every rational thought. Nicholas Moreno raises a single hand, and his men stop exactly where they stand. The gesture is small. The obedience is absolute. He looks at her. Actually looks at her. Not past her. Not through her. At her. At the soaked woman with the wild eyes and the uniform with the coffee stains, standing in the downpour like she is already drowning. Your name, he says, and his voice is deep and solid like an oath carved into stone. See Cassandra. Cassandra Santos. Why are you out here, Cassandra Santos, in a broken car in the middle of a November night? The rain is so loud it drowns out everything except the sound of her own breathing. She opens her mouth to tell him about the shelter, about the fever, about how she has been checking the time every 15 minutes, how every hour that passes is another hour her daughter sits alone and sick and waiting for a mother who cannot reach her. My daughter, she says instead, and the words come out like a prayer. My daughter is at St. Catherine's shelter. She has a fever. A high fever. I think it might be getting worse, and I need to get to her. I need to see if she needs a hospital, and my car is dead and my phone is dead and I do not have enough money to. She stops. The look on his face has changed. It is subtle. A slight shift around the eyes. The barely perceptible relaxation of the line between his brows. But it is there, and Cassandra sees it, and in that moment she understands something profound. This man, this dangerous man with the scar on his face and the gold on his wrists, has just recognized something in her that he thought he would never see again. A parent willing to burn themselves down entirely to save their child. Vinny, he says, still looking at her. One of the men steps forward immediately. St. Catherine's shelter. Verify the child. Emma Santos. 6 years old. Fever. I want the current temperature, respiratory rate, and a pediatrician on staff evaluation. Call me in 5 minutes. Yes, boss, Vinny says, and he is already on his phone, already moving. Get her in the car, Moreno says. I cannot just leave my car here, Cassandra says. You will not have to. We will handle it. The only thing you will do is sit down, stop talking, and let me get you to your daughter. Something cold and dangerous stirred in his chest as he looked at her, wet and desperate and clutching the photograph of Emma like it was the last thing keeping her tethered to the earth. He had not felt like this in years. Since the night they told him his wife was 6 months pregnant and the doctors found a defect they could not fix, a valve in the baby's heart that had formed wrong, and they had to make the choice to induce labor at 22 weeks because the baby would not survive full term, could not survive even 1 hour in the world outside her womb. His son had lived for 17 minutes. Moreno had held him. 17 minutes of weight in his arms, a perfect tiny human with closed eyes and a thread of a heartbeat, and then nothing. 17 minutes and then loss so vast it had consumed everything he thought he was. He had not cried then. He did not cry now. But Cassandra Santos, standing in the rain with her $5 and her broken car and her daughter burning up with fever across the city, had just reminded him that some people still believed in impossible things. Some people would still fight with their last breath. Some people still had hope. Come on, he says, and he reaches out his hand. She takes it. The rain falls heavier as they walk toward the black SUV, and none of the men standing in the downpour know that this single moment of mercy, this decision by their boss to extend his hand to a woman who was nobody, would place them all in the crosshairs of two people who destroy lives for profit, who had already begun marking Cassandra Santos for destruction, who would stop at nothing to make sure that this moment of connection between the most powerful man in Chicago and a broken waitress cost him everything he had built. But the rain hides many secrets. Now, before we go any further, if this story is hitting you the way it should, if you are already wondering what happens next, please drop a like on this video. Share it with someone who needs to believe that mercy still exists in this world, and subscribe to this channel so you do not miss the rest of what is about to unfold. Because the story you are about to hear will change you. Now let us rewind. Let us go back to 3 weeks earlier, to the day the world came to an end for Cassandra Santos, to the day fire consumed her home and Preston Mercer sent her the first of many letters that would haunt her nights and steal her sleep. Let us understand how a woman with nothing at all came to stand in the rain begging for help, and what it cost her to ask. 3 weeks before the highway, before the black SUVs and the rain and the moment that would reshape everything, Cassandra Santos stood in the charred skeleton of what used to be her home. The apartment building on South Morgan Street was nothing but a blackened husk now, its windows hollow eyes staring at nothing, its walls crumbling like ancient tombs. November wind cut through the space where her front door had been, carrying ash that fell like grey snow, settling on her hair and shoulders. The smell was impossible to breathe through, burnt wood and melted plastic and something chemical that made her throat close up, that made her body remember the sound of the ceiling collapsing, Emma scream, her own hands reaching, always too late. She held a single photograph. Just one. Emma at age 4, gap-toothed smile, wearing a pink dress with white flowers embroidered across the front, the dress Cassandra had bought from a thrift store for $7.50, the dress her daughter had worn to school picture day. This was the only thing she had salvaged from apartment 3C before the firemen pulled her out, before they said it was an electrical fire, before the neighbors started whispering about Preston Mercer and insurance fraud and a landlord who burned down buildings for the payout. She had nothing left. Nothing. The apartment was gone. Her clothes were ash. The small collection of Emma's toys, a wooden train, a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing, a music box that played a lullaby, all of it was now particles floating through the cold air. She stood there for an hour, maybe longer. Time had stopped being a useful measure. Across the city, in a shelter on the south side that smelled like industrial cleaner and broken dreams, Emma was shivering on a cot in the children's dormitory. 6 years old. The fever had started 2 days ago, a small heat radiating from her skin when Cassandra held her, nothing serious yet but getting worse every hour. The shelter had given Emma borrowed clothes, everything 2 sizes too big, the sleeves hanging down past her fingers. Other children surrounded her on all sides, their cots pressed together, their breathing filling the darkness. Emma did not know any of them. Emma had never slept anywhere without her mother before. At a gas station on Division Street, Cassandra washed her face in a bathroom that smelled like mold and industrial soap. The mirror showed her something that looked like a person but wasn't quite. Dark circles under her eyes that looked like bruises. Hair that hadn't been washed in 4 days, pulled back tight, grey already starting to show at the temples even though she was only 31. Her hands were shaking as she gripped the edge of the sink. Everything she owned now fit into a single backpack. 2 changes of clothes. Emma's photograph. A journal with $15 tucked inside the back cover. A gas station gift card with 85 cents remaining. That was it. That was the sum total of Cassandra Santos's life in November, 3 weeks after fire consumed her home and turned her into the kind of person who slept in her car. The car itself was a 2004 Honda Civic with 187,000 miles on the odometer and a check engine light that had been burning continuously for 2 years. She had paid cash for it, $1,200 saved over 3 years, money she had kept hidden in a sock in the back of her closet, money she had sweated and bled for on double shifts at the Paradise Diner. The car was unreliable and slow and the passenger window did not roll down, but it was hers, and right now it was the only home she had left. The parking lot outside the burned building was empty except for the silver Mercedes. Everything changed when Preston Mercer stepped out. He was 52 years old, though he carried it like a man 10 years younger, the kind of aging that came from money and obsessive attention to his own appearance. His suit cost more than Cassandra's monthly rent had been, a tailored thing in charcoal grey with a silk tie in burgundy. He wore a gold watch that caught the November light, and 2 men flanked him, both younger, both large in that way men became when they spent their time intimidating people smaller than themselves. "Cassandra Santos," he said. Not a question. He had done his research. He had been waiting for this moment. She turned toward him, exhausted, still holding the photograph of Emma. "We need to discuss your debt," he continued, stepping closer. His smile did not reach his eyes. His eyes were the color of a shark's, empty, predatory, interested in her only as a problem to be solved or a body to be used. "The building burned down," Cassandra said. Her voice was barely a whisper, like wind through broken glass. "I lost everything. It was an electrical fire." The fireman said. "The fire is not my concern." Preston Mercer pulled out a piece of paper, handwritten, the ink dark and aggressive. He held it toward her without letting her take it, reading from the list himself. Back rent for September and October. $3,000. Damages to the property during the fire. $12,000. Replacement costs for fixtures destroyed in your unit. $18,000. Repair costs for structural damage to the building. $32,000. Total debt, $65,000. The number hit her like a physical blow. $65,000. She did not earn $65,000 in 3 years. She did not earn $65,000 in 5 years. "I don't have that money," she said. "You have 7 days to acquire it," Preston Mercer said. He stepped closer, and the smell of his cologne, expensive, cloying, invasive, filled the space between them. His voice dropped to something that was not quite a whisper but carried more menace than a shout. "Or we could discuss alternative arrangements. My apartment, 45 East Chestnut. Tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. We could work something out." She understood what he was saying. She understood exactly what he was offering and what he expected in return. She had been waiting tables since she was 18 years old, had worked in enough restaurants to know what happened to women when men decided they were indebted, had avoided enough hands in the back kitchen to understand the shape of his proposal. 7 days, Miss Santos, Preston Mercer said, and he turned back toward his Mercedes. The 2 men followed him. The car door closed with the soft sound of expensive engineering. He drove away, leaving her standing alone in the parking lot holding a photograph of her daughter and nothing else. 3 blocks away, in a penthouse apartment on Lakeshore Drive, Evelyn Blackwell was reviewing eviction notices. She sat at a marble desk that cost $40,000, her fingers manicured and painted a shade of red that looked like dried blood. The penthouse was all clean lines and expensive nothing, modern art on white walls, furniture that had been designed by someone famous, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at Lake Michigan and the rest of the city below her like a kingdom she owned. She was 60 years old and looked 50 through the application of expensive procedures and absolute refusal to age like other women. Her hair was blonde, cut in a style that required maintenance appointments every 2 weeks. Her skin was tight and smooth and entirely without character. Eviction notices spread across her desk like playing cards. Dozens of them. Each one represented a family, a life, a small world that Evelyn Blackwell was methodically destroying for profit. The phone on her desk rang. Her hand reached for it without hesitation. She already knew who it was. "Preston," she said. The Santos woman broke, his voice came through, satisfied, hungry. "She'll pay or she'll comply. Either way, we get what we want." "Good," Evelyn Blackwell said. Through her penthouse windows, the city stretched out in gray and brown under the November sky. "Make sure she understands there's nowhere to run. Make sure every door closes. She chose to say no to you 3 months ago, and that choice was stupid. Now she needs to understand the cost." She hung up without saying goodbye. Across the city, at St. Mary's Shelter on the south side, the nurse practitioner in the children's dormitory was taking Emma's temperature for the 4th time that day. 102.6 degrees. The fever was climbing. Cassandra arrived to pick up her daughter as the sun was setting, the November light turning everything orange and then purple. Emma was curled on her cot, still wearing borrowed clothes, her small face flushed with heat. When she saw her mother, she tried to smile, but it looked like it took all her strength. "Hi, Mama," Emma said, her voice thin, like she was speaking from very far away. Cassandra knelt beside the cot and pressed her hand to Emma's forehead. The heat radiating from her skin was unmistakable, the kind of fever that meant her body was fighting something, that meant this was not just tiredness or a minor cold but something that required attention, medicine, help that Cassandra could not afford. "We're going home," Cassandra whispered, though she had no home, though home no longer existed except in photographs. She gathered Emma in her arms. The child weighed almost nothing now, seemed to weigh nothing, seemed to be disappearing into illness and fear, and walked back toward the parking lot where the Honda Civic waited under a streetlight. The car started on the first try. Small Merces. Small, fragile Merces that could not hold back the weight of what was coming. They drove through the city as darkness fell completely, Emma sleeping fitfully in the passenger seat, her breathing shallow, her fever turning her skin into a furnace. The check engine light glowed red on the dashboard like a warning that no one could stop. And then, somewhere on the expressway between the shelter and nowhere, the car made a sound. It started as a grinding, deep and terrible, like metal being torn apart from the inside. Cassandra felt it vibrate through the steering wheel, through the seat, through her bones. The engine coughed. Coughed again. And then, with a final sound like something dying, the car began to slow, to lose power, to coast toward the shoulder of the expressway as if it too was giving up, as if it too understood that there was nowhere left to go. Cassandra pulled it as far onto the shoulder as the dying momentum would take her. The headlights of other cars rushed past, indifferent, unseeing. Rain began to fall, light at first, then harder, then a downpour that sounded like 1,000 fists pounding on the car roof. She sat with her hands on the steering wheel and her daughter burning beside her and no cell service and no money and no plan and $5 in her pocket, $5, all of it, the sum total of her remaining resources, and somewhere in the darkness behind her, she heard the sound of approaching engines. The rain was falling so hard it erased the streetlights. The rain fell so hard it erased the streetlights. Water hammered the windshield of the black SUV in sheets, drumming against the roof like 1,000 fists demanding entry, and Nicholas Moreno sat in the back seat watching a small child sleep against her mother's shoulder while the city dissolved into grey beyond the windows. Emma's breathing came shallow and fevered, her forehead burning hot enough that Cassandra kept pressing her palm there, checking, rechecking, as if her touch could somehow cool the fire consuming her daughter from the inside. The girl's lips were pale. Her fingernails had taken on a bluish tint. And Cassandra had never felt more helpless in her entire life, never felt the weight of her own powerlessness settle so completely across her chest like a blade wrapped in ice. The hospital appeared through the rain, Northwestern Memorial, its emergency entrance glowing with fluorescent urgency. Theo pulled under the awning and before the SUV had fully stopped, Vinny was opening the door, the November wind tearing through like something alive and furious. Cassandra lifted Emma, feeling how light she had become, how she weighed almost nothing anymore as if the fever was burning away her substance, her reality, her hold on this world. The girl stirred slightly, murmured something wordless, and Cassandra whispered, "We're here, baby. We're here. The doctors are going to make it better." But she was lying. She did not know if the doctors could make it better. She did not know if they would even see them without insurance, without payment, without proof of anything except desperation. She did not know anything except that her daughter's skin was on fire and she had $5 in her pocket and that number might as well have been 0. Nicholas Moreno stepped out of the SUV behind them, rain soaking through his cashmere coat in seconds, the fabric worth more than a year of what Cassandra used to earn before the building burned, before everything collapsed into this November nightmare. He moved toward the emergency entrance with absolute authority, his men flanking him, and something in the way he walked, the precision of it, the expectation that the world would simply rearrange itself around his presence, caused the ER doors to slide open before anyone touched them. A nurse looked up from her station and her entire face changed. Recognition. Fear. Respect. The three things that always arrived together when people saw Nicholas Moreno. "Mr. Moreno," she said, and the way she said it was like a prayer. "How can we help you? The child needs a fever evaluation. Pneumonia, possibly." His voice was deep and solid like an oath, like something that could not be broken or questioned. "She needs it now." Within 90 seconds, a pediatrician appeared. Within 2 minutes, Emma was being carried back, Cassandra following, her soaked clothes leaving dark prints on the linoleum floor. Moreno remained in the waiting room, water pooling beneath his feet, his men positioned at cardinal points around the space like sentries guarding something precious. He did not sit. He did not move. He simply stood and waited, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the doorway where Cassandra and Emma had disappeared, and Vinny exchanged a look with Theo that neither man could quite interpret, because in 15 years of working for Nicholas Moreno, he had never seen him stand and wait for anything like this. He had never seen him abandon the posture of control that usually came as naturally to him as breathing. Time moved strangely in hospital waiting rooms. Minutes felt like hours. Cassandra reappeared twice to ask questions she could not afford the answers to: CT scan, blood culture, for antibiotics, hospital admission, the numbers accumulating like a debt she would never climb out from under. The second time she came out, her face was streaked with tears she could not quite hide, and she sat down in a plastic chair and did not move again. The chair was uncomfortable. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with a sound like insects trapped in glass. The air smelled like antiseptic and someone else's suffering, and Cassandra put her face in her hands and understood with absolute clarity that she was not strong enough for this, not anymore, and that sometime in the past 3 weeks, desperation had finally exceeded her capacity to endure it. Pneumonia, the doctor had said. Another day and it would have been critical. Another 2 days and we would have been talking about ICU care, possible intubation, life support. The words had not landed as relief. They had landed as accusation. She should have brought Emma to the hospital sooner. She should have known. She should have been able to provide something more than a shelter cot and her own increasing terror as the fever climbed. The waiting room chair beside her suddenly held weight. Not Vinny or Theo. Nicholas Moreno sat down, his wetsuit jacket dripping onto the linoleum, and he did not speak for a long moment. He simply sat there, and Cassandra felt the impossible fact of his presence the way you feel a change in air pressure, the way you feel a storm approaching. "She'll be okay," he said finally. His voice was quiet now, stripped of the authority that had filled it moments before, and that quietness was somehow more powerful. "She'll recover. The pneumonia is responding to antibiotics. By morning, her fever should break." Cassandra raised her head. Her eyes were red. Her mascara, what remained of it, had run in rivers down her cheeks. "How do you know?" "Because I asked. The doctor told me. And I believe him, because I have very good reasons for people to tell me the truth." He paused. "Your daughter will be okay. Because of you." Cassandra's voice was barely a whisper, barely enough sound to carry across the space between them. "If you hadn't picked us up on that highway, if you hadn't brought us here, if you hadn't..." She could not finish. The gratitude and the shame of accepting it mixed together into something too complicated to speak. "I don't understand why. You don't know us. You don't know me. Why would you do this?" Moreno's jaw tightened. His hands, resting on his thighs, became fists. When he spoke, his voice came from somewhere deep, somewhere that Cassandra understood immediately was private, somewhere he did not usually allow words to emerge from. "I had a son. I never met him, but I had a son. My wife was pregnant. We prepared everything, the nursery, the crib, the walls painted blue with stars. His name was going to be Daniel." Present tense became past tense. He was stillborn. 20 hours of labor and then silence. The worst sound I have ever experienced is the silence that replaced his cry, the cry that never came. Vinny turned away slightly, his shoulders stiffening. Theo's hand moved toward his phone and then stopped. Neither man had heard their boss speak these words. Neither man had known that his wife had left, that there was a nursery somewhere that remained frozen in time like a memorial, untouched for 8 years. My wife could not stay with me afterward. She left because looking at me meant looking at everything we had lost. So I learned that there are many kinds of death, many kinds of ways to lose someone. Moreno turned his head, and when his eyes met Cassandra's, they held a grief so old and so absolute that she understood, truly understood for the first time, that powerful men were still just men, that mafia bosses were still just people carrying impossible weight. I understand what it means to stand helpless while your child suffers. I understand what it means to need someone to reach out a hand when you're drowning. Tonight, I can be that hand. Cassandra did not cry. She had no tears left. Instead, she nodded slowly, and something in that moment shifted between them, something that had nothing to do with money or power or the fact that he was a man who could destroy Preston Mercer with a phone call, and everything to do with the simple human act of one person witnessing another person's pain and choosing not to look away. Hours passed. Emma stabilized. The fever broke just before dawn, the way the doctor had promised. Cassandra was allowed into the pediatric wing, and she found her daughter in a small hospital bed, feline in her tiny arm, oxygen monitor clipped to her finger, but breathing more easily now, more deeply, the rattling wheeze beginning to ease. She pulled a chair beside the bed and did not move again, just sat there and watched Emma breathe, counting each breath like a prayer, like evidence of survival, like a miracle that had come attached to the name Nicholas Moreno. Outside, November rain continued to fall on Chicago. Inside, in the waiting room 3 floors below, a mafia boss sat alone with his grief finally acknowledged, finally spoken into the world, and understood that sometimes saving another person's child was the closest he would ever come to saving his own. The rain hammers against the balcony railing like 1,000 accusations, and Cassandra Santos stands 23 floors above Chicago with nothing left to lose except the one thing that still matters. Her hands grip the wet metal, knuckles white, the November cold seeping through her borrowed jacket, a jacket from the shelter's donation bin, slightly too large, sleeves that swallow her wrists. Below, the city sprawls in a maze of light and shadow, millions of lives moving forward while hers compresses into a single question: how much longer can she pretend that her daughter doesn't deserve better than this? The handwritten list sits on the apartment table inside, numbers that have grown like a cancer. $65,000. Penalties. Interest. Damages for the fire that Preston Mercer himself set. The math is designed to destroy her, each calculation another door slamming shut. She had $5 in her pocket this morning. $5 and a daughter who asked at breakfast why they couldn't stay in one place, why colors always had to be sad colors, why Mama looked scared all the time. Emma's voice breaks through the rain, small and sleepy from the bedroom. Mama? Where are you? That single word, Mama, pulls Cassandra back from the railing's edge like a fishing line through her ribs. She turns from the precipice, walking inside with water streaming from her hair, soaking the carpet, and she holds Emma until the shaking stops. Her daughter smells like the hospital's antiseptic soap and something sweet, something innocent, something that has no place in a life this broken. Cassandra picks up her phone with trembling fingers and dials. Nicholas answers on the first ring. Are you safe? He was at her school, Nicholas. He stood by the fence watching her at dismissal. The teacher called. I can't keep running. I need help. Real help. Whatever it takes. There is a silence, but not empty. Filled with the sound of a man calculating, deciding, choosing. I'm already working on it. But you need to trust me. Can you do that? I don't have a choice. Yes, you do. You're choosing to fight. That's all that matters. The phone goes dead, but not in abandonment. In purpose. 40 minutes later, across the North Shore in the Kenilwood mansion where black marble floors echo with the footsteps of men who have learned to move silently, Nicholas Moreno assembles his team in the study lined with first edition books that cost more than Cassandra's entire life. The walls are hunter green, the furniture Italian leather worn smooth by decades of careful use. Vinny and Theo stand beside the mahogany desk, their suits custom tailored, their faces carved from the kind of discipline that comes from knowing exactly what you are willing to do. Preston Mercer, Nicholas says, and the name lands like a gunshot in the quiet room. Tonight. The FBI investigation has been building for 8 months. They have 40% of what they need. We're going to give them the rest. Theo's eyebrow rises. We're working with federal agents. We're giving them a gift. Nicholas walks to the window overlooking the grounds, his reflection ghostly in the dark glass. Mercer's files. Every document. Digital records, recordings, proof of 6 separate women he tried to coerce into alternative arrangements to pay rent. Proof of arson spanning for years. 20 properties burned for insurance fraud. 40 families destroyed. The Santos case is just the latest. Vinny exchanges a glance with Theo. In 15 years, they have never seen him work with law enforcement. And Evelyn Blackwell. The FBI already has her. They're just waiting for the final piece. Nicholas turns from the window, and his smile is the smile of a man who has already won before the battle begins. We're going to hand it to them on a silver platter. The raid happens at 5:13 in the morning on a cold December day, 42 days after the highway meeting that changed everything. The FBI descends on Preston Mercer's office building on South Halstead with 12 agents in tactical gear, warrant stamped and signed, boxes of evidence already waiting because Nicholas Moreno had delivered it anonymously 48 hours prior. Files stacked like confession booths. Digital records with timestamps. Recordings where Mercer's voice dripped with menace and entitlement. They pull him from his Lake Forest home while the morning is still dark, still confused, still half asleep. He emerges in his bathrobe, silk and expensive, his face collapsing like a building scheduled for demolition. The photographers are already positioned on the street because Nicholas made certain the media knew exactly when and where to be. "I want my lawyer." "You can't do this." Mercer screams as Agent Harrison reads the charges in a voice that sounds like concrete. "Preston Mercer, you're under arrest for fraud, racketeering, arson, conspiracy, and extortion." He's led out in handcuffs, trembling like a cornered animal, cameras flashing in rapid-fire bursts, dozens of them, hundreds, the kind of media presence usually reserved for celebrity catastrophes. The Chiron appears on every news channel before dawn fully breaks. Chicago landlord arrested in massive fraud scheme. His face, panicked and small, frozen in every frame. Evelyn Blackwell's destruction is surgical and calculated in a different way entirely. The FBI raids her Lakeshore Drive penthouse at the same moment, federal agents emerging from elevators with boxes and warrants, seizing files that connect her to 12 shell corporations used to launder money, hide assets, obscure the profits of human suffering. But Nicholas had ensured something worse would happen before the legal system even finished processing her. The documents leaked to the Tribune before breakfast. Leaked by someone, no one knows who, though the fingerprints are strategically absent. Leaked documents detail her involvement in schemes that displaced 200 families, burned 18 buildings, destroyed lives for profit margins measured in percentages and spreadsheets. By 8 a.m., the photographs are everywhere, Evelyn Blackwell's face beside the word embezzler. Her society friends distance themselves within 2 hours, text messages flying through group chats with the speed of contagion. The philanthropy board she chaired demand her resignation. Her own daughter, Madison Blackwell, releases a statement through her lawyer condemning her mother's actions publicly, completely, irreversibly. By noon, Evelyn Blackwell is a pariah, her image broadcast on every channel, every platform, the kind of destruction that lives forever in the digital age, permanent as a scar. The sentencing happens in federal court 3 weeks later, the courtroom cold and marble and official with the weight of justice that moves slowly but crushes completely. Preston Mercer stands before Judge Patricia Williams, his public defender beside him whispering ineffectually, while the prosecution reads the charges one final time for the record. 40 years, Judge Williams says, and her voice carries no emotion, which somehow makes it worse. Federal prison, no parole eligibility. Mr. Mercer, you preyed on the vulnerable. You took what little they had and you burned it. Literally. You burned their homes and their lives and their futures for insurance payments. That ends today. Mercer collapses into sobs, his body folding like wet paper, the handcuffs catching the light as marshals lead him away. He doesn't look powerful anymore. He looks small, which is the truest reflection he has ever cast. Evelyn Blackwell's sentencing comes next, and it is ice where Mercer's was heat. 35 years. Her expression doesn't change, but her hands do, they tremble slightly as she stands, and in that tremor is the beginning of her understanding that money and society and connections cannot buy immunity from consequence. Every asset seized. Every bank account frozen. Every shell corporation dismantled. The empire she spent 40 years constructing collapses in 40 days. Too quick, too easy, too merciful, Nicholas had wanted them to live with the destruction, to spend decades in cells while watching everything they built dissolve from the inside. But mercy was not his to refuse. The system had spoken. The law had moved, slowly and imperfectly, but it had moved. That night, in the North Winthrop apartment where Cassandra and Emma now live permanently, there is a knock at the door. Not violent. Measured. Patient. When Cassandra opens it, Nicholas stands in the hallway in a dark cashmere coat, his scar barely visible in the low light, his eyes holding something she has learned to recognize as gentleness wrapped in diamonds. "It's over," he says simply. "Both of them. Federal prison. Life sentences essentially. They will never touch you again. They will never touch anyone again." Cassandra's knees weaken. She holds the door frame. Behind her, Emma pads into the hallway in her pajamas, and when she sees Nicholas, she doesn't hesitate. She walks straight to him and takes his hand. "Are the bad people gone?" Emma asks, her voice carrying the kind of clarity that only children possess. "Yes," Nicholas says, and he kneels slightly so he is at eye level with her. "The bad people are gone. Your mama is safe now. You are safe." Emma nods, satisfied with this logic, and walks back to bed. But her hand lingers in his for a moment longer than necessary, and when she releases him, there is something transferred between them, not quite trust yet, but the beginning of it. The foundation. Cassandra steps into the hallway and closes the door gently behind her. The hallway is narrow, walls painted apartment beige, but under the fluorescent light, it feels like sacred ground. "Why?" she asks, and the word contains multitudes. "Why did you help? Why did you risk everything? Why does a man like you see someone like me?" "Because," Nicholas says, and his voice is deep and solid like an oath, "someone should have reached out their hand for me once. Someone should have seen me when I was drowning. They didn't. But I can be that person for you." The rain has stopped. Outside the building, Chicago lies sleeping, and somewhere in the federal detention facility on 71st Street, Preston Mercer lies in a bunk that is not his, counting the years stretching ahead of him like a prison sentence that will never end. And in a luxury penthouse that is no longer hers, Evelyn Blackwell sits alone for the first time in her life, understanding finally that some falls cannot be recovered from, some reputations once shattered cannot be reassembled. But in the hallway of a modest apartment in North Winthrop, Cassandra Santos stands with a man who has learned that sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. The rain has stopped. Outside the building, Chicago lies sleeping, and somewhere in the federal detention facility on 71st Street, Preston Mercer lies in a bunk that is not his, counting the years stretching ahead of him like a sentence written in stone. And in a luxury penthouse that is no longer hers, Evelyn Blackwell sits alone for the first time in her life, understanding finally that some falls cannot be recovered from, some reputations once shattered cannot be reassembled. But in the hallway of a modest apartment in North Winthrop, Cassandra Santos stands with a man who has learned that sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. 2 months have passed since the arrests. The apartment is small, the walls painted a pale yellow that catches the morning light, and Cassandra has hung Emma's drawings on every available surface, crayon renderings of stick figures and flowers and a house with smoke coming from the chimney that used to terrify her before the nightmares began to fade. Emma is at school now, in 3rd grade, wearing clothes that are hers, purchased with her own paychecks from the non-profit. The job Nicholas helped her find pays $22 an hour, which is more money than Cassandra has ever held in her hands in a single week, and every paycheck feels like a small miracle that she immediately deposits because she is still afraid that if she holds it too long it will disappear. The late-night diner smells exactly the way it always has. Hash browns and old grease and the ghosts of 1,000 night shifts. Cassandra sits in the booth where this all began, the checkered floor gleaming under fluorescent lights that have not changed since the day she met Nicholas here 5 months ago, asking for help with a sick child and receiving something far larger than she ever expected to ask for. He sits across from her, hands wrapped around a cup of black coffee, and the ease between them now is something neither of them thought possible when she was drowning and he was broken. "The FBI agent told me you were the anonymous source," she says, and her voice carries a gratitude that has taken months to articulate. "They would have found him eventually." Nicholas does not look at her directly. He has never been comfortable with thanks, as if kindness is something that should happen in shadow and silence. In another 5 years while he destroyed 50 more families. "You did this." She reaches across the table, takes his hand. The touch surprises them both. His hand is large, calloused, marked with scars that map a life spent in darkness. Her hand is smaller, stronger than it looks, the hand of a woman who has learned to survive on nothing. That night on the highway, Cassandra says, "Why did you really stop?" The question has been building inside her for weeks, and now it spills out like something that cannot be contained. He is quiet for a long moment, the way he always is when the questions touch something tender. The diner around them continues its midnight rhythms, the cook calling out orders, the hiss of the grill, the soft clink of glasses being stacked. "Because you were in the rain holding your daughter like she was the only thing that mattered in the world, and 8 years ago I held my son the same way, knowing he would never hold me back. I saw a parent who still had a chance to save their child. I couldn't walk away from that. I'm sorry. For your son. For what you lost." The words are simple, inadequate, but she says them anyway because sometimes inadequate is all that is available. "Daniel." His name was Daniel. He says this quietly, as if speaking his son's name aloud could somehow shatter the silence that has held it for 8 years. The nursery is still there, in the Kenilworth mansion, blue walls and stars on the ceiling faded but still visible. Last week he opened the door, stood inside for 10 minutes, cried for the first time since the funeral, and when Vinny found him there his men understood finally that their boss was becoming someone new. Someone capable of being human. Cassandra squeezes his hand. "Thank you for helping us. For seeing us when we were invisible." The Kenilworth mansion sprawls across for acres, and when Nicholas shows Cassandra and Emma the property for the first time, the weight of it nearly crushes her. The gates alone cost more than the apartment building that burned down 3 weeks before she met him. The gardens are maintained by a groundskeeper who lives in the East Cottage, and the pool reflects the sky like a mirror someone placed on the earth by mistake. Emma runs through the grass laughing, actually laughing, and Cassandra watches with tears streaming down her face because she has not heard her daughter make that sound since before the fire took everything. "She's laughing," Cassandra whispers. "I haven't heard her laugh like that since before the fire." Nicholas stands beside her, hands in pockets, watching Emma chase a butterfly that will never stop long enough for her to catch it. "She's safe now. You're both safe. Because of you. Because you were strong enough to ask for help. That's harder than people think." Emma runs up breathless, her eyes bright in a way that makes Cassandra's heart break and repair itself simultaneously. "Mr. Nicholas, can you push me on the swing?" The swing set stands alone in the back garden, metal chains glinting in the sunlight, untouched since it was installed in a moment of optimistic planning that never quite landed. Nicholas looks startled. No child has called him anything in 8 years, no small voice has asked him for anything so simple and so profound as to be pushed toward the sky. "Yeah," he says. "I can do that." He walks behind her, places his hands gently on her back, and begins to push. Emma shrieks with delight, and the sound carries across the grounds like a bell announcing that something has changed fundamentally in this place of marble and expensive silence. Cassandra watches him push her daughter gently, carefully, and sees the ghost of the father he almost was, the man he might have become if fate had not taken his son before the child ever drew breath. 3 blocks away, in the downtown offices of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a file sits on an agent's desk labeled Moreno, Nicholas. The cooperation agreement is signed and filed, and in exchange for his testimony against Preston Mercer, Evelyn Blackwell, and 4 other corrupt city officials, Nicholas Moreno is being offered something that seemed impossible 6 months ago. A second chance. A way to step out of the darkness with his life intact. At Nicholas's office that same evening, the city is beginning to disappear into twilight. Vinny brings him the final sentencing documents, sealed and official, stamped with the federal seal that means it is permanent. Mercer gets 40 years. Blackwell gets 35. Both will die in prison. Vinny's voice carries satisfaction, though not joy. This is not celebration. This is simply the weight of consequences finally landing where they belong. Nicholas closes the file. Good. The word is simple, and his men have learned that when their boss uses simple words it means something massive has been decided. The buildings they burned are being seized and liquidated. The Victim Restitution Fund is distributing the proceeds. You did this, Vinny says. I've worked for you 15 years, boss. Never seen you like this. With a woman and the kid. She reminded me that there are still things worth protecting. You care about them. It is not a question. I do. Vinny grins, something his face has not done in months. About damn time you let someone in. What neither of them knew yet was that the Federal Bureau of Investigation had been monitoring Nicholas's cooperation carefully, and a deal was being discussed in rooms they could never enter, a deal that could change everything. 6 months later, spring has come to Chicago. The November rain is a distant memory, replaced by sunshine that falls warm on the sidewalks and makes the city look almost hopeful. Cassandra and Emma's apartment is decorated with drawings on the refrigerator, photographs on the walls, evidence of a life being built from ashes. Cassandra is getting ready for work, Emma is eating breakfast before school, and there is a knock at the door that has become familiar. Nicholas stands there in a suit, but holding 2 coffees and a bag of donuts from the place on State Street where they first met. Emma launches at him with a kind of hug that used to be impossible. Nicholas, you brought donuts. The familiarity between them is natural now, months of careful trust built into something real. They sit at the kitchen table while Emma chatters about her upcoming field trip, and there is a domesticity to it that neither of them expected, the Mafia boss and the woman he saved on a November highway, building something that looks like family. In the Kenilworth mansion, Nicholas finally asks Cassandra to see the nursery. They stand in the doorway together, blue walls, stars on the ceiling, the name painted above the empty crib in letters that have faded slightly over 8 years. Cassandra slips her hand into his. You're a good father. Even to a son you never got to raise. Because you honored him by not forgetting. I'm thinking of changing it, Nicholas says quietly. Not erasing him. But maybe making it a place that could be used again. Someday. The implication hangs between them like a promise that is not quite spoken but understood completely. In federal court, 2 weeks later, Nicholas Moreno stands before a judge as part of a deal negotiated in rooms he was never invited into. In exchange for cooperation and testimony, his sentence for past crimes is reduced to time served and 5 years probation. The judge makes it clear, Mr. Moreno, you are being given a second chance. Don't waste it. Nicholas looks back at the gallery where Cassandra sits with Emma, where Vinny and Theo stand witness to his transformation. He nods once. I won't, Your Honor. Outside the courthouse, media swarms, but Nicholas walks past them to where Cassandra waits. Emma runs up, grabs his hand. The photograph is captured by every camera, the Mafia boss, the woman he saved, and the little girl whose mother's desperation changed everything. Cassandra Santos had $5,065,000 reasons to give up. Nicholas Moreno had 8 years of grief and a nursery he could not enter. Emma Santos had a fever and a mother who would fight until her last breath. On a November night in the rain, their paths crossed, and everything changed, not because of money or power or revenge, but because one person saw another's humanity and chose to act. Preston Mercer is in federal prison for 40 years. Evelyn Blackwell is serving 35 years. The buildings they burned are being rebuilt by a non-profit funded by seized assets, housing the families they displaced. The late-night diner at 3 in the morning is almost empty. Cassandra and Nicholas sit in their usual booth, and Emma sleeps on the seat beside her mother, her head resting on her jacket. They are just talking, the way they have 100 times now, but there is a comfort to it that speaks of permanence. The checkered floor reflects neon light, and the rain has started again outside, but gentle this time, almost peaceful. Nicholas reaches across the table, takes her hand. I've been thinking about that first night. When you stumbled out of the rain asking for help. I thought you were going to have your men shoot me. He laughs, a sound his men still marvel at. I thought I was too broken to help anyone. You proved me wrong. We saved each other. Yeah. We did. If this story moved you, drop a like right now. Share it with someone who needs to remember that even in the darkest rain, someone might stop to help. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story about how one choice can change everything. Comment below, have you ever been helped by a stranger at your lowest point? Or been the stranger who helped? Tell us your story. Sometimes we all need to remember we're not alone in the storm. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We wish you good health, joy, and days filled with peace and happiness. No matter how hard life gets, remember, after the rain, the sky clears.